Well, hello and welcome to week 6 of sermon preparation. I'm really glad you've joined us this week as we are discussing style and delivery. There will be 3 aspects of our lesson today. We'll be looking at the audience to whom you are speaking. We'll be looking at what it means to deliver a sermon and deliver it effectively. And then 8 principles, 8 essentials for effective communication. Let's begin, shall we? In addressing the audience to whom you're going to be speaking, you need to keep in mind that people have some basic needs. They have a need for food, clothing, and shelter. They have a need to feel like their life is meaningful and has a purpose. They need to have a sense of community and deeper relationship. They need to be appreciated and respected. The closer people feel to God, the better they feel about themselves. They need to be listened to and to be heard. They need to feel one is growing in faith. And they have a need for practical help in developing a mature faith. All of that comes from a survey that George Gallup did. So how do you communicate in such a way as to minister to people's needs? Well, let me give you some practical pointers on that. First, you should observe the people to whom you speak. Observe them. You know that your sermon style should be matched to the church and the community in which you're preaching in. What is wonderful in one context can be an irritant in another. Long-distance shepherding, the using of the same style of preaching and the same sermons in place after place after place is rarely appreciated by either the congregation or by you yourself as you're doing your exegetical work or as you're preparing your sermon. So observe the people to whom you speak. You should observe the way they communicate, both verbally and non-verbally. You should observe the way they live, how they use technology, their occupations, their income level. You should observe their relationships, how the roles of husbands and wives and children in the extended family and community, and how all that plays out within the community that you're ministering to. And then you need to observe the premises of their beliefs, their worldviews, their values, and their motivations. As you build connections for your sermons, ask the following questions. What do they believe? What do they value? What do they need? And what do they do, or how do they behave? Aristotle reminds us in his classic work, Rhetoric, that we must understand what is required to bring an audience into a state of emotion. To adequately communicate, a speaker must participate and know his audience. So some questions to ask of your audience. To whom am I preaching? What is the setting for this message? What are the needs of my audience? What is going through my audience's mind? What are they thinking about as they read the text that you're getting ready to preach on? Where are the members of my audience in their spiritual development or pilgrimage? You should be reflective of where they are in their own faith journey. How does my audience listen? Can they follow the progression of thought in the sermon with their ears? Or is the way you're presenting it too complicated for them to be able to follow? What communication tools can I use to help the audience hear what I am trying to say? Should you use repetition, visuals, movement, gestures, music, even drama in order to communicate the message you're trying to get across? What does my audience see in me? When you're up to speak, do you command their respect or authority? Do you come across as one of them? Or do you come across like you don't even care? Be careful what your nonverbals are communicating. And then also, as you're developing the central proposition of your sermon, I know we talked about this a few weeks ago, but remember to keep your audience in mind that it should be the most memorable sentence in your whole sermon. You should work to restate it and reiterate it and connect your whole sermon back to this central proposition. Focus on the ear. Preaching is oral and not written communication. So you want to think, how will people hear what I'm saying? State your main sentence, your main idea, your big idea, your central proposition of your sermon in the most memorable sentence possible. And state it in the active and not the passive voice. Use the precise, concrete, and familiar imagery to your listeners, and speak so that your audience readily sees the truth of Scripture as relevant and applicable. Now, what about when you are addressing an audience that is composed primarily of unbelievers? Or how should you address the unbelievers in your congregation? Well, first, develop a sensitivity to them. Understand how unbelievers think and learn to like unbelievers. Jesus certainly did. You should too. Speak on topics and titles that they would choose as you're selecting a text to preach from. Select texts that answer the questions that they might have. Explain the wisdom of the Bible. Help them to understand that and see how the Bible, the passage you've chosen, addresses the needs that they have. Use current illustrations. Make sure to connect and relate in a way that they can readily follow. Allow for a response time that gives freedom in time. Give them a freedom of choice and gives them a freedom to make a decision without using high-pressure tactics or anything of the sort. Now, there are 5 extremes to avoid as you address your audience. Don't be too emotional, pleading, weeping, pressuring. Don't be too extended. Now for the 15th verse of our hymn. Don't be too expansive. All who have ever sinned need to come forward for this invitation. That's ridiculous. Don't do that. Don't be manipulative. If you want complete financial freedom, you should give me money or what have you. Don't do that. Avoid that. And don't be too Madison Avenue, for lack of a better phrase. Don't be too slick, too polished. Make sure that you present yourself in a way that the people who you're speaking to can relate to you. I suppose the only exception to that would be if you were on preaching at Madison Avenue. Otherwise, make sure that you present yourself in a way that is approachable to the people you're addressing. Some suggestions for making a quick connection with your audience. If they're loud and boisterous, quiet them with silence. Another method might be implying that you need their help. Dramatize what you plan to tell them. For example, I'm deeply troubled by something, and I'm wondering if the same thing is also troubling you. Ask them how they feel about your subject or your presentation. Say something that will involve them. For example, I'm going to get you to think about an important topic. And then remember, as you're addressing your audience, that they have 3 unspoken questions every time you speak. And those 3 questions are this: what's the point? What's in it for me? And now what? Again, what's the point? What's in it for me? And now what? Be mindful of who your audience is, what they're like, and how you can address their needs from the Word of God. A second aspect of our discussion today revolves around the subject of delivery. Delivery. How do you deliver a message effectively? Being a good communicator has never been more important. How can you communicate well? Well, how can you speak with confidence and with power? I want to give you 3 tips on this coming from an executive's guide to successful presentations. First, prepare thoroughly. Know what you're going to talk about. Know how you're going to present it. One of the areas you will be challenged to do as you present your actual sermon in this class is to present it from memory. You need to prepare it thoroughly. Second, double check your facts and statistics. Make sure that what you are presenting is right, especially in regards to your illustrations. Make sure they're true stories if you're presenting them as a true story. And then ask yourself, how can I make this presentation shorter? Don't go long, don't be long-winded, but instead reduce the amount of time. Help yourself relax. Take gradual steps to get over stage fright. Practice giving a speech to an empty room. Tape your presentation twice before you give it. Take a videotape and watch yourself delivering the presentation. Find out what motivates you. Monitor your gestures and so forth so that you can help yourself relax. And then third, think positively. Remind yourself that your people don't want you to be bored, but they want you to succeed and communicate well and be yourself. In regards to delivery, there are always some marks of poor style. Let me mention a few of these from Brian Chappell. He points out that some marks of poor style include being overly verbose or verbosity, a lack of clarity in what you are saying, circumlocution, saying many words but never what you intend to say, and a lack of dramatic quality or an absence of flow and rhythm. In contrast to a lack of good style, Chappell notes that there are some elements to strong style, including a clarity of speech, a vividness in style, the use of simple words. Don't try to show off and use big words. Use words that people can understand. Use specific, pointed words. There should be a freshness of your explanation and a degree of beauty in what you are presenting. How can you enhance your sermon style? Let me give you 3 just pointers to be monitoring. First, pay attention to your own way of preaching, your own method of delivery. Second, study the style of others, in particular of the masters, and see what you can pick up on from them and apply in your own preaching. And then, as well, for those of you who are just starting out in preparing your sermons, you may want to try to write out once a week a sermon. Write it out, the whole thing, and practice delivering it. Now, I would encourage you not to take that into the pulpit with you. However, having that practice of writing out a sermon will help you going forward. To close with some principles for effective sermon delivery. Some principles for effective sermon delivery. You should be evaluating your style, reworking your message and jettisoning the useless, and aiming for clarity by developing a clear outline, keeping sentences short, keeping sentences simple, and using simple words. You should work on repeating the main idea of your sermon, but using different turns of phrases to do that. Be positive, be upbeat, know what you're going to say, know your stuff. Stay steady. Be natural. Be yourself. Avoid being a copycat of someone else. Yes, you can learn from others, but you don't need to be them. And then be neat, clean, and appropriately dressed for the occasion. Finally today, I want to address with you the 8 essentials of effective communication. You know, I'm standing here today in the chapel, the old chapel of Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And I'm standing at a pulpit from which I have heard many great preachers preach and some not so great preachers preach. And often the difference between a great sermon and a so-so sermon is simply how well someone communicates. 8 rules for good communication. The first is eye contact. Look at people when you're speaking to them. Make eye contact with those in the audience. Try to look for a friendly face and hold your glance there for even up to 10 or 20 seconds. It will seem like a long time, but continue to focus. It helps you to connect. And make sure you're looking for friendly eye contact. Now, as you're looking for a friendly face, as you're making eye contact with people, let me suggest that you use involvement rather than either intimacy or intimidation. You want to be involved with them. You want to see that they're involved with you, but you're not trying to intimidate them, nor are you trying to make them feel close and warm towards you. So involvement. At the very least, you need to hold eye contact for 5 seconds. Be aware of the eye dart. When your eyes are always jerking around and you aren't focusing on anything, people feel like you aren't there, you aren't present. And also beware of the slow blink, where your eyes stay closed for a long period of time. Instead, focus on focusing straight in and making good eye contact. Some basic exercises to help you here. Use video feedback, watch yourself on film, practice it one-on-one when you're communicating with other people. Make sure you're looking them in the eye. Practice with a paper audience. Stick notes on chairs or on the wall in the room where you practice your talk. And be sure to include the faces at the fringes of the room you're in. And then watch TV. Look at the eye savvy. For those who are good at, to increase your awareness and eye savviness by seeing real people in high pressure situations. A second essential for effective communication is having good posture and movement. People make a lot of assumptions about us in the first few seconds after they meet us. Assumptions about our attitude, our confidence, our competence, even our rank and position. Many people have posture habits that undermine trust and convey a lack of self-assurance. So make sure as you're speaking to stand tall, with your shoulders back, your stomach in. Lean slightly forward, knees somewhat flexed so that you can bounce lightly on the balls of your feet. You should feel like an athlete, ready to move easily and quickly in any direction as you're communicating with people. Watch your lower body. One of the most common posture problems is getting on the back hip. When you do this, it conveys that you aren't interested in the people you're speaking to. You look disinterested, bored, like you don't want to be there. And you don't care about what that you're talking about, so why should they? So watch your lower posture. And then move. To make emotional contact with our listeners, we need to convey excitement, enthusiasm, and confidence when we speak. Motion is visual. Move around. Motion is energetic. Also, get rid of any physical barriers between yourself and an audience, and beware of repetitive mechanical movements. It can be worse than standing still. A third element of effective communication has to deal with your dress and appearance. Your dress and appearance. Remember, you never get a second chance to make a good first impression. The basic rules: be appropriate. There is not so much a right or wrong way to dress as there is an appropriate or inappropriate way to dress. Some tips. Remember, conservative is always better when you don't know your audience. Dress and groom up, not down. It is safer and more comfortable to be overdressed than underdressed. Pick 2 or 3 basic colors that look good on you, and then get all your clothes in these colors. Mix and match from there. Dress and groom at a conscious level. Don't just throw on whatever you have when you're going to speak to people. And then button your jacket. Button your jacket. Some basic exercises here. Get people to give you feedback on how you look, especially a spouse. Be observant and test out your first 2 seconds. Remember that people form their first impression and often lasting impressions of you in their first 2 seconds after meeting of you. Those are primarily based on your dress and appearance. Dress appropriately. A fourth element of good communication, of effective communication, has to deal with your gestures and smiles. Your gestures and smiles. Find your nervous gesture and stop making it. It might be playing with a ring or buttoning and unbuttoning a coat or twirling some hair or what have you. Whatever it is, film yourself, find what you do over and over again, and stop it. Get rid of it. Second, you can't over-exaggerate. When you're in a church setting, go big. Make your gestures big. If you're gesturing to your audience's right or your left, gesture this way, and don't gesture small, but gesture big so that they can see it all the way from the back of the room. Smile. Smile and find out which third you are in. Most people fall into one of 3 categories in regards to their face. 1/3 of people look naturally happy when you look at them. 1/3 look naturally neutral, and 1/3 look downright grim. If you aren't in that naturally happy group, Practice smiling and smiling sincerely. One way to do this is to raise your apples. By that I mean, picture your cheeks as having apples on them. And smile. Pretend that your cheeks are having to lift up apples as you're communicating, as you're speaking. Now, a word of advice here, phony smiles don't work. A fifth rule for effective communication involves voice and vocal variety. You want to work to make your voice naturally authoritative. If your voice is high and nasal sounding, work on bringing it down to a lower register. Develop the voice on a roller coaster. People associate a rich, well-projected voice with authority and competence. Avoid being monotonous. Vary your tone in the way you are pronouncing, avoid a monotone, but vary your tone. Visualize your voice as a roller coaster. Lift it over the summit, then let it plummet back down. This mental exercise forces you to be aware of the dynamic range of your voice. Be aware of your telephone voice. Research shows that your voice, the intonation, resonance, or auditory delivery of your message accounts for as much as 84% of your emotional impact and believability. When people can't see you, such as when you're talking on the phone, what do you communicate? Does your telephone voice differ from your speaking voice? If so, why? Are you more expressive and energetic on the phone? If that's the case, I would challenge you to take your telephone voice and bring it over to your speaking voice. Put your real feelings into your voice. Put a smile into your voice. Be conscious of the emotional signals your voice sends. A sixth element in effective communication revolves around the use of words and non-words. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. Proverbs 25:11. Some basic rules here. Build your vocabulary. Stretch your vocabulary. Know how to use words. Don't use them to show off, but continually be on the lookout for new words that can help you communicate in the clearest, most colorful, most interesting way for every situation. Paint word pictures, and then beware of jargon. Also, be aware of non-words, ums, uhs, ahs, and be absolutely committed to removing these from your speaking. Listen for them as you speak, and instead replace them with a pause. A seventh element in the use of effective communication is having good listener involvement. Good listener involvement. You can draw listeners in through a multitude of ways, using drama, for example, good eye communication, good movement, the use of visuals, through asking questions, through using a demonstration, through using a sample or a gimmick, or even creating interest. Always be on the lookout for new ways to involve your audience in what you are speaking to them about. One final area for effective communication, an eighth area, is the use of humor. Some good rules to follow at this point. First, don't tell jokes. Don't tell jokes. Unless you are in that rare 99th percentile who can actually tell a joke successfully, with timing, delivery, and flair, avoid jokes. Rather, use what is fun and note that that is better than funny. Your goal is not to be a comedian, but to establish connection, creating an atmosphere of fun, friendliness, and openness. Find the form of humor that works for you, and then use humor in language. The right emphasis on a single word can provoke a laugh and cement the connection between you and your listeners. So use humor, use what you find fun and funny, but don't worry about trying to tell jokes. Well, it has been good to talk with you this week about style and delivery. As we conclude our discussions for today, I know that this week you have your exam that you will be taking. It will be based on all the lectures up to this point, as well as on your readings in the Vines and Shaddix textbook. I look forward to meeting with you again next week as we discuss with Dr. Sutton the history of preaching.